This series is made possible with thanks to scientists and synagogues, a grassroots initiative run by Sinai and Synapses, supported by CLAL, the National Jewish Center for Learning and Leadership, in consultation with the Dialogue on Science, Ethics, and Religion program of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and funded by the John Templeton Foundation, along with other individual donors. We are also supported by and want to express our gratitude to University of Texas at El Paso's Religious Studies program, the Computer Science Department, and the Mathematical Sciences Department here in El Paso, along with all of the other folks from El Paso who are joining with us this evening, as well as those from around the country and perhaps even around the world. Next slide. So this is the second in a series of 6 talks we are calling Higher Meanings, Connecting Religion and Mathematics. Please note that Dr. Victor Katz will be presenting Thursday, June 10th at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time on how religion in medieval times shaped the Jewish, Muslim, and Catholic study of mathematics. And we want to also express our gratitude to Dr. Katz and to welcome him this evening as well. We are so grateful to Dr. Kim Jongerius for being with us. And I'll invite you, Doctor, to turn to the next slide so that I can introduce you. An undergraduate math and English major, Dr. Kim Jongerius earned her PhD from Colorado State University, she would say, a long, long time ago. She has maintained her interest in language, claiming in fact that mathematics is itself a language, and has pursued that interest writing Rules and Insights, connecting the mathematical and linguistic abilities of C.S. Lewis, exploring connections between the languages of mathematics and faith by co-authoring chapters on dimension, infinity, and proof in mathematics through the eyes of faith, and developing a cross-disciplinary honors course titled Pattern and Structure, Mathematics and Literature. She is a professor of mathematics at Northwestern College, a Christian liberal arts college, and she has been involved in her church as a small group leader, deacon, and member of the leadership team. Kim has also long been active in the Association of Christians in the Mathematical Sciences, including terms as ACMS board secretary, vice president, and president. She lives in Orange City, Iowa with her husband and 2 cats, has 2 adult children, a son-in-law, and excitingly, a grandchild on the way. We welcome you, Dr. Jongerius, and are so thrilled to have you with us. I'm gonna add you here. Okay. And now everybody should be able to see you. And now I'm going to disappear and turn it over to you.
Thanks, Rabbi Zeidman. I'm really excited to be here. I want to thank all the many sponsors of this event. And I also want to thank Rabbi Ben Zeidman and Dr. Larry Lesser for inviting me to join you here tonight. I enjoy talking about this kind of stuff. I have fun with it, and it's a little different from what I do every day in the classroom. So it's going to be a fun experience for me, and I hope for all of you as well. Well, we're going to talk about assumptions tonight, but focus on dimension. We'll get started with some preliminaries. So first of all, what do I mean by an axiom? Well, in mathematics, an axiom is a foundational statement that we assume is true. And so these are the statements that you can assume are true for tonight. There will be a presentation. I'll do most of the work with that, but your questions will help a lot later on. There will be discussion. Larry Lesser will be moderating that, so feel free to put your questions in the chat window. I don't think you'll get a chance to ask them verbally because there are just too many of us here, but he will pass them on when we get to that part of the talk. And there will be a survey and some polls. Rabbi Zeidman talked to you about the survey earlier, so that link will be in the chat window. When I watched one of these last month, in fact, I watched Larry talk last month, and I just went ahead and clicked on it right away, and then it was available for me easily at the end. He'll also handle the polls, so I put together some interactive polls so you guys can participate in this. I want to point out this is not graded. I have no way of attaching your answers to your name or location or anything. This is just for fun. And research has shown that if you try to figure something out, even if you get the wrong answer, seeing the right answer right afterwards can help cement that in your mind. So we'll do a little bit of that here and there. I want to also tell you a little bit about my own faith beliefs, mainly because it'll be good for all of you to understand where I'm coming from. And again, I wish I could know where all of you are coming from, but I'm going to make some assumptions here. So these are my axioms of faith. And the first few, I think that probably, well, first of all, I've organized them in order of kind of what I think most of you would agree with me on, down to what I think maybe few of you would agree with me on. I think the first three, if you hold these as self-evident truths, then of faith, then you might get more out of this talk than people who don't. Certainly the first two, though there's fun math along the way, even if you have none of these beliefs. And if you hold the first two and you're not quite sure about the second one, maybe I can help you understand a little bit about how miracles can be possible. And the rest are some of the basics of my Christian faith. This might come in here and there in the conversation, but it's not the focal point. And certainly I'm not here to convert anybody. It's just for us to understand each other better and to think about mathematics and what it might say about faith. So how did I even get here? Well, of course, I'm here because Larry and Ben asked me to come join you, but I am a product of public education. So I went to private, like preschool and kindergarten, because there was no public stuff where I was. But other than that, it's been public education all the way through. I was never encouraged to talk about my faith anywhere except in church. And then I got a job. In fact, I actively sought a job at a Christian college. And so I had to change my perspective a little bit, because here at Northwestern, as with many other Christian colleges out there, we're not just loosely affiliated with some church that set us up, 100 years ago or something. We are really expected to actively practice our faith and to actively share that faith with students, and to actively integrate our faith with our understanding of our discipline. So when I came to Northwestern, I knew this was expected, and I thought, okay, what do I have to talk about? I have no experience talking about this kind of stuff. And one of the things I thought about was this book called Flatland by Edwin Abbott that was written in 1903. And it's a story of a two-dimensional world, and when a creature in that world starts interacting with someone from the third dimension. And I thought, I think I can do some stuff with that. And I'll talk more about that later on tonight. We're also expected to write at my school a tenure paper. So yeah, back in the dark ages when I had been there long enough to get tenure, but way earlier than now, I wrote a paper entitled Mathematics, a Reflection of the Rational Creator, because that too is something I believe about God, that God is rational, and God created the world according to rational rules, and that we as rational, beings created in the image of God, that we are capable of studying those rules, of looking for them, of understanding them, at least to some extent. As Ben mentioned, I also love language. And I did a sabbatical project once on C.S. Lewis. And really, I was looking for how he used mathematics in his writing, which is quite a bit. But I found some interesting stuff about his background, like he was bad at math and he was a horrible speller. And I think those are not unconnected, right? You spell a word wrong, who cares? People can almost always figure out from the context what you're talking about. You spell a number wrong and you're kind of in deep trouble right from the get-go. Interestingly, his low math scores actually meant that he started at Oxford with what we would call today a provisional admission. So they said, okay, you can come, but you have to study up and you have to pass the math portion of the entrance exam before you can really study here. And he was well on pace to not do that. He basically studied all kinds of foreign languages like he'd always loved, and just kind of ignored the math. And then luckily for him, he was sent off to World War I. And when he came back, they allowed the returning servicemen to pass by the entrance exam. So we might not have the C.S. Lewis record we have if not for that. Pattern structure is an honors course that students can take for either quantitative reasoning or literary context credits. So it does both, well, one or the other, they get to pick. And really, this book project was sort of the pinnacle of my professional career, I think. It was a fantastic experience. I'm going to talk a little bit more about it here. This book was co-authored by 10 members of the Association Association of Christians in the Mathematical Sciences that Ben mentioned earlier. The editors were Russ Howell and Jim Bradley, and we kind of divvied up the chapters. I found one of the things awesome about this is that this was like I found my mathematical writing soulmates. I never knew there was such a thing, but there is, and I found two of them. So I had a great experience writing with Rob Myers and also writing with Ray Rosentrader. And the one I'm going to talk about most today is stuff in our dimension chapter. And there's some ideas that might not be in there, but is connected to that. So if you ever want to pick up this book, then you'll be familiar with some of this stuff already. But I'm going to talk a little bit too about some of the other stuff, just because it ties in with this idea of what do we assume? What do we think we know before we move on? So here's kind of an idea from Proof and Truth. First of all, just a poll. Here's our first poll. So Ben will pop this up here. Can you prove that the unknown angle is angle A? So yes, no, you're freaking me out already. So pick one of those and I'll watch the numbers come in. And then I'm going to, once it's sort of settled down, I'll read the results, just since we're recording this for a YouTube video later. And my understanding is that this poll question will not pop up there. So looks like we're balancing out at about 68% of people say, yeah, I can prove that. Cool. About 10% are saying, yeah, or 25%. Sorry, no, I'm not sure. I don't think I can prove that. And I'm freaking out some of you. So sorry about that. I will not continue to try to do that, though freaking people out might be, in fact, part of my basic personality. Certainly sarcasm is. So if you hear sarcasm here and there, one of my students once asked another, is she always this mean? And the other one said, no, she's just trying to be funny. So there you go. If it sounds like I'm being mean, I'm just trying to be funny. Okay, so here are the results. I can share them. And I'm glad a bunch of you can prove it. That's awesome. If you can't, we're going to talk very briefly about it now. And if I'm freaking you out, I'm so sorry. But there's more cool stuff to come. So here's why it's true. So I can get my arrow up here. A straight line adds up, the angles on it add up to 180 degrees. So here you have one straight line, and it comes from angle A plus angle B, adding their measures together. Well, here's another straight line, and it comes from adding angle B to this unknown angle. So A plus B is 180, and B plus this thing is 180. Well, that means A plus B equals B plus the question mark. So A and the question mark must actually have the same value. Now, some of you might have even remembered back to your high school geometry days, which might be closer for some of us than others. I don't know, that these are called vertical angles, where two lines intersect. And they're across from each other, and vertical angles are congruent. So if that was your proof, that's absolutely fine. You're remembering the results of a proof from the past. In infinity, Larry did a great job talking about this last time. If you weren't here, you can look up the YouTube video on that. I'm sure it's available, a link on Mount Sinai's website. And so I'm just going to talk briefly about one example here. And again, to try to give you a feel that it's cool. It's not as hard as you might think it is. So let's think about this sequence of numbers for a minute. So 0.9, 0.99, 0.999, and it keeps going, right? And we would say mathematically, I'm going to let this sequence go off to infinity. And so the numbers just, I keep adding nines in all the time. So here's the next poll for you. Can we run that next one? Is that number 0.999999 forever? Is that really a number? So no, yes, and it's something really close to one, or yes, and actually it is one. What do you think? I should probably do something to, fill the time while we're watching the poll numbers rise. I'm just sort of watching them here. I'm going to end it pretty soon here. It looks like about 12% say no, that is not a real number. And 47% say, yeah, it's a real number and it's really, really close to one. And 42%, yeah, it's a real number and in fact, it is one. Well, and the truth is it actually is one. It is a real number and it's one. And I'm going to give you one type of proof of it and maybe talk about a few others. This is really cool. Now, this is something you can impress your children or grandchildren or nieces and nephews with. So I'm going to use algebra, right? Algebra is actually useful for something. Here it is. I'm going to, let's see, get up here so I can click. There we go. I'm going to let X be this unknown number, 0.99999 forever. calculus actually tells us that X exists, that this sequence has a limit. And now I'm going to take that equation, I'm going to just multiply both sides by 10, right? So I just move the decimal point over one place because I multiplied by 10. And now I'm going to look at this part. Notice here, this is just 9 plus X again. So I'm going to replace that with 9 plus X. And now it's to an algebra equation that my guess is most of you could solve. I'm going to pop it up here just in case it's been, maybe longer for some of you than others. This means I can subtract the X over. So 10X minus X equals 9. Well, wait a minute, then 9X equals 9. And so there you go. X is equal to 1. That's pretty cool. Now, a lot of students kind of struggle with that at first. So I'm not going to say necessarily you're going to accept this whole thing right now. But I want to give you another reason to think about it. So I remember when I first saw this, I thought, well, that's just not possible. It doesn't look like 1, right? It should look like 1 if it is 1. And one of my friends said, well, can you think of any numbers between that and 1? And I went, huh, I don't think I can. So maybe if there's no distance between them, they've got to be the same thing. But here's even an easier way I thought about recently. What if I divided all these terms by 3? So I'd be looking at 0.3, 0.33, 0.333. Now, if I wrote that as 0.3 with a bar over the 3, my guess is that most of you would go, oh, I know that number. That's 1/3. Well, you're right. 0.3 repeated forever, that is 1/3. And what happens when we multiply 1/3 by 3? Hey, we get 1. So there you go. 0.9 is going on forever. That's just the same thing as 1. All right. The next thing, and this is really most of what I'm going to talk about, not the Koch snowflake necessarily, but other parts of dimension as we go on tonight. So I'm going to hit this one more later. I will point out a couple of interesting features of it. First of all, by the way, this isn't the actual Koch snowflake. This is an early iteration of it. It's formed through an iterative process, which means we do essentially the same thing again and again and again to transform this. And then again, we look at the limiting process, what happens when we've done it on and on and on forever. And this is pretty close. So it looks a little fuzzy around the edges here. That's because things are getting so tiny. So it definitely, this curve encloses a finite area, right? I can fit it all more or less in this circle I'm drawing. But it turns out that the curve itself has infinite length. So that's already a little bit weird. And its dimension is not what you might think either. If we just focus on the curve part, that turns out to have a fractional dimension. So I'll talk more about that in a little bit here. First, I want to, let's see, I need to get out of this poll. Ben, can you get me out of the poll?
You should just be able to click out and exit.
Yeah, okay.
Is it working?
My mouse, there we go. All right. So I have my, I have a TV to watch all this on, to see the slides on, and I have my computer, and they're normally next to each other, right? Now they're like front and back. And so anyway, if things aren't working, that's why. Okay, to illustrate the significance of assumptions, I want to start with a non-math example. So how many of you still kind of struggle sometimes? Be honest with yourself anyway. When you think about specific occupations, do you often have a particular gender in mind for it, even if it's an occupation that in fact lots of people hold, regardless of gender? So for example, I write biostatistics test problems for one of my classes. I often involve biologists, veterinarians, and medical doctors, researchers, etc. I usually don't use a pronoun at all. And students somehow mostly start using a male pronoun in their answer. It has never happened that I have not used a pronoun and a student puts in a female pronoun. They sometimes will keep it neuter. Sometimes I specify I use a female pronoun, and then they'll switch it to a male pronoun, which is kind of interesting. They just are assuming that, and these are okay biology majors. Some of them are women who are going to become scientists. And so it's kind of fascinating to me that we still have these assumptions kind of buried up in here. Here to me is now my classic example. About 5 years ago, I chaired the lead pastor search committee at my church. And I sent emails off to seminary professors thinking, I'm a professor. When I have a student who really stands out in class, I kind of follow their career a little bit, and see what they've been interested in and what they're doing. And so I just thought seminary professors might be able to give me names of potential candidates. So I sent this thing off, and I got back a number of responses, and I'd say about 2/3 of them addressed their email to Mr. Jongerius. Now, I didn't specify on the thing. If I'd put a title, I probably would have said Dr. Kim Jongerius, just because it was a more professional thing. But anyway, apparently, it is more likely that a man named Kim is sending you an email than that there could be a female chair of a lead pastor search committee. Their assumptions were shaping what they believed. Mathematically speaking, Euclid, who lived thousands of years ago, was the first one to say, you know what, we need to sort of specify what our assumptions are, and we need to try to build mathematics in a regulated way. And so he started us off on the axiomatic method, which interestingly starts with undefined terms. So when I think about undefined terms, the importance of them, I keep thinking about this old story, right? The little boy says, "Dad, what's holding the earth up?" And excuse me, and the father thinks for a second. He says, "Well, it's an elephant." And the son ponders that for a while, and then he says, "Okay, Dad, but what's holding the elephant up?" And the father thinks about it a little bit more. He says, "Yeah, it's another elephant." Right? And the son ponders that for a while, and he says, "Dad, what's holding that elephant up?" And the father sees where this is going and says, "Look, it's elephants all the way down." Which is kind of silly, right? It can't be elephants all the way down. There's got to be something at the base. The little boy was onto something, right? Something has to be holding things up. And in mathematics, we say we start with undefined terms. So it's either things like point. In geometry, we kind of agree that we know what a point is. We don't really specify it. And basically, if we don't have those undefined terms at the base, we have nothing to start talking about, nothing on which to base the other definitions. So those are there for a reason. The axioms. Now, in Euclid's time, when he made axioms for geometry, he was saying, look, these are obviously true things. And so everybody agrees these are true. And so we can start proving things with it. So here's Euclid's axioms, not in the original language, of course. And I've simplified a little bit more than that to hopefully make sense. But I think we'd all agree if you have 2 points, there's a line segment between them. If you have a line segment, you can go in both directions and make it into an infinite line. If I give you a center and a radial length, you can picture the circle that goes around that center. And all right angles are exactly the same size. The fifth one, yeah, we'll get to that in a minute. Okay, here's another poll. Suppose you have a line and a point that's not on the line. How many lines are there that go through the point and are parallel to the given line? 0, 1, 2, or infinitely many? It's kind of fun to watch the numbers move around here. So far, we've got a 0 in the mix. We've got 1, we've got infinitely many. No one is saying 2. And the battle is on. Still no one with 2. No one wants to take 2. Huh? Okay, we'll probably stop it about there. So what we get is that about 8% say there are no parallel lines. 47% say, oh, there's one parallel line. And nobody picked 2. And 44% said infinitely many. Well, the answer is, it depends, actually, on your perspective and on your assumptions. So Euclid's fifth postulate is, there's a different wording of it, but this means the same thing, that if you have a line and a point not on that line, there is a unique line that's parallel to the given line. So 1 for Euclid would be the correct answer. This was a bit problematic, though. Even Euclid waited as he proved stuff from those other 4 axioms and definitions and things. He waited until he had milked them for all they were worth before he threw this 5th one into it, which suggests to us that maybe he too realized that this might be one assumption too far. In fact, mathematicians were trying to work on this and figure out whether or not this really had to be an axiom. Maybe we could prove it from the others. Well, they didn't get very far with that. And then they thought, well, okay, maybe we can use indirect reasoning. We'll assume it's false and then see if we can get a contradiction. And if we can, if something false leads to a contradiction, then that assumption must actually be true after all. We must have been faulty in that assumption. Well, they did that and they didn't come up with problems. So how can you negate this thing? If I tell you this is false, well, then there would either need to be more than one line going through that point parallel to the given line, or there would need to be none at all. Those are the different ways that we could negate it. And what they did was they developed other completely consistent systems, geometric systems based on a different fifth axiom. So they never arrived at a contradiction. And that's when we realized, we have to be a little more careful in how we talk about things and what assumptions we make. And we need to really be careful we lay out the assumptions so that people know what we're building our theory on. So in fact, this thing, yeah, you might say, well, of course, everybody knows this if you took high school geometry and remember it, that if you have a line and a point not on that line, there's a unique line through it. I'm going to suggest that this actually doesn't fit our reality at all. And so here's the thing. Now, we don't live on a flat plane, unless you're a member of the Flat Earth Society, in which case this talk might not be for you. But most of us, I think, would agree that we live on a spherical surface. So spherical geometry is really a better place for us to think about reality. And so what is a flat line? What is a line? Sorry, a straight line on a sphere. Well, now I'm going to imagine that you're big enough to walk around here quickly. Okay, let's say I'm just making a little circle around the North Pole. If I were leading you in circles and you were blindfolded, would you know that you were walking in circles? Yeah, because you would feel that the inner foot was taking smaller steps compared to the outer foot trying to keep up with it. So if I were to lead you around the North Pole, that would not really work very well. On the other hand, if I led you around the equator, over and then back behind in the background, you would feel like you were walking straight. I mean, assuming all the mountains were flat and we could walk on water. So if life were really ideal like that, it would feel like you were walking straight. And in fact, we say that a straight line on a sphere is what's called a great circle. So like the equator, it breaks the sphere into exactly two identical pieces. Not just the equator though, right? Longitudinal lines do that. And you could pick a sort of fake North Pole somewhere else and go around the front and then around the back. And so that also would split the Earth into two pieces kind of this way. That would be considered a straight line as well. So two straight lines on the sphere always intersect. In fact, they intersect twice, right? Like think about this longitudinal line that we see. Obviously, they're going all the way around. It hits the equator here and it hits the equator there. And there's nothing special about that. If you pick two lines off of a sphere, if they're the same line, they intersect all over the place, and otherwise they hit each other exactly twice. So, so this is kind of cool. Okay, let's talk about angles in a triangle for a minute. So here comes another poll. What can you say about the angles in a triangle? And here you should be able to select multiple options. Either, well, pick any of them that you want. So does each angle have to be between 0 and 180? Does there have to be a right angle? Do the angles add up to 180 degrees? What do you remember from geometry? And the battle is on between angles between 0 and 180 and angles that have to be 90. And it has disappeared from my screen how many people say the angles have to add to 180. So hopefully that'll show up for me so I can see the numbers again. Okay, I think I will close it off here. And yeah, 86% of you, the angles in the triangle have to add up to 180 degrees. Absolutely true in Euclidean geometry. So we'll look at a different example in spherical geometry in a moment. One angle has to be 90 degrees. No, totally my bad. I faked you out by putting a triangle that is a right triangle up there. But they don't have to be. That angle could be bigger than 90 or it could be smaller than 90. There's lots of options. Each angle is between 0 and 180. Yeah, also true in Euclidean geometry. Not so true other places. So get out of that and come back here. And so again, in our spherical world, so I got a little ahead of myself there. Let's suppose you and a friend are up at the North Pole and you face in not back to back, but at right angles to each other. Okay, and so one of you starts walking. So your friend starts walking down to the equator and stops there. And you moving at right angles to your friend. So up here is a right angle. You also walk down to the equator, and then you turn and follow the equator to your friend. Now, think about how this came down here. This is a right angle, and this is a right angle, and this is a right angle. So this triangle has 270 degrees in it. Okay, that's a little freaky. So you were absolutely right answering that question. Those of you who said the angles add to 180, that's kind of drilled into us from Euclidean geometry, geometry happening on a plane. This is not necessarily true in other geometries. So if we don't have the same fifth hypothesis about parallel lines, we may not have angles that add up to 180 degrees. Okay, well, this problem is not new to us. Dimension is a hard thing. Thinking about what geometry you're in is a hard thing. And really I want to move now into sort of the heart of the matter here, which is thinking about how our understanding of dimension, of geometry, of different ways of thinking about stuff can influence our understanding of God. As we can see, even in ancient times, folks had a hard time reconciling the concept of a God who is with us with a God who is beyond our understanding, who is all powerful, who is all knowing, who is infinite. How do we picture an infinite God being with us? Well, we have to think about what our assumptions are. And I'm going to get into dimension to convince you, like Larry did last time. You know, infinity is more complicated than you think it is. If you didn't see Larry's talk, you need to look it up because he really did a great job with this. So God, who is infinite, is more complicated than we think he is as well. Dimension is similar, right? Dimension is not as simple as we think it is. So we're used to thinking about it in certain ways, and it doesn't always fall out exactly that way. So I'm going to talk you through some of the basics of dimension, and then we're going to get to this connection with the nature of God as we go. All right, so what is dimension anyway? What do I mean by that? Well, there are a couple different definitions people throw around. One is the number of coordinates needed to specify a point in the object. So if the object is a single point and you're at that point, I don't need anything to tell me where you are. I know you're at that point. So this is 0 dimensional. If I have a line segment though, now it gets more complicated, right? I don't know where you are on the line unless you tell me some information. So if I give it a coordinate system, I tell you, all right, that's going to be part of the real number line. We'll just go from 0 to 1. Now, if you tell me I'm at 0.75, hey, I can figure that out. That's, yeah, maybe about here, right? So I know where you are on the line. If you tell me I'm at 0.259, I'm going to go, well, okay, that's a little over a quarter, so I'm somewhere in there. I know pretty much where you are on the line. You give me any value and I can tell which point it is on the line. What if I get so this is one dimensional, right? What if I get what I normally think of as a two-dimensional object, like a rectangle and its interior? Well, let's do the same thing. So I'm going to put a 0 to 1 axis horizontally and a 0 to 1 axis vertically. And now if you tell me, for example, that you are at 1/2, 1/2, then I'm going to figure you went 1/2 unit over and 1/2 unit up. And so you're right in the middle of this thing. If you're at 1/1, you went 1 unit over and 1 unit up. Oops, lost my thing. 1 unit over, 1 unit. So you'd be right up here in this corner. 2 coordinates tell me where you are in the object. This is 2-dimensional. Similarly, for a 3-dimensional block, I need 3 coordinates to tell where I am there. I'm going to freak you out a little by putting the origin, the place where they're all 0, up here. And the reason for that is that if I put it down here, then this 1 is, well, I can't see it. So you can see it in the picture, right? So if I'm at the point 1/2, 1/4, 0, I would be going 1/2 unit down, 1/4 unit to the right, and then not moving because my third coordinate was 0, so I'd stay here. The third coordinate was 1, I would go back to the back of the block. All right, well, that's one way to think about dimension, and mathematicians like this way, especially algebraists like me, because I can easily think of higher dimensions from here. If I think of dimension as the number of coordinates that I need, then what's the 4th dimension? Well, I'm just going to add a 4th coordinate to my points. And what's the 5th dimension? Well, I'm going to add a 5th coordinate to my points. So I can have infinite dimensional space. I'm just going to keep adding coordinates, as many as I want. Some people like a little more concrete feel to their geometry. So maybe we want to think of dimension instead as the number of mutually perpendicular directions of possible travel within the object. So back to the point. If you're there, well, you are not going anywhere, right? So there's 0 directions of travel. It's 0 dimensional. If you're on the line, well, you can go to the right or you can go to the left. That's 2 directions, but they're not perpendicular to each other, right? They do not form right angles. So there's really only 1 direction of travel. If you're over here in the solid, well, I could choose go one way and I could go at right angles to that. Now I could have gone at right angles the other way, but that wouldn't be perpendicular to both of these, right? So there's only 2 that are perpendicular to each other. I can't go anywhere else and be perpendicular to both of those things. But if I'm in a solid box, I can go one way. I can go at right angles to that. And then I can go perpendicular to that. Now, that's a little hard to see here. I've got that going back into the box. We often think about in math and science as a right-hand rule. So I've got 3 axes here. These 2 are perpendicular to each other. These 2 are, if I can move my fingers right, perpendicular to each other. And these 2 are perpendicular to each other. I'm not as flexible as I used to be. Anyway, that's sort of my axis system that can move around with me. Okay, well, this is more insightful, right? Thinking about directions of travel, I can picture that in my mind. Coordinates are a little bit abstract. The problem is, because this isn't as abstract, it's harder for me to move up into higher dimensions. And it's hard for me, I can understand it conceptually that, okay, I now need a 4th direction of travel that's perpendicular to all 3 of those, but I cannot picture it because I'm sort of trapped in this 3-dimensional world in terms of how I can picture things. So that's why I like to go with the coordinate method, because when I have coordinates, then I can go up as high as I want, as many dimensions as I want. Okay, but as I said, things are trickier than that. So with coordinates, we can think of any whole number dimension, but in fact, there are things that are in between dimensions. So let's look at that Koch snowflake a minute. I'm going to start with an equilateral triangle, and we can assume for the moment that all the sides are length 1. Okay, so we're thinking about this side as being length 1, that's length 1, that's length 1. And it's just a triangle, not the part inside, okay, just that boundary. Now here's what I'm going to do. I want you to watch this side as I do it. On each of these sides, I'm going to replace the side with this. I'm going to take out the middle third, and I'm going to put equal lengths to that down like this as a kind of a triangle attached to it. So my path will now go over a third, down a third, back up a third, and then over the final third. So this length 1 thing is now going to become length 4/3, and that's going to be important for what we talk about. So watch that, and over here you'll see what I talked about in terms of taking out the middle third and replacing it, but I want you to see what happens here. Okay, see, so it happened on all 3 sides, that I took out the middle third and made that part of it longer. Hey, integration of faith and learning, look at that. No, I'm kidding, that doesn't really count, but it's kind of neat when little connections like this come up, like, oh, it's the Star of David in my construction of the Koch snowflake. Okay, now I'm going to keep this process going. So focus in on this side now, and you'll see I'm going to take out the middle third and replace it with a little 2-sided triangular path, right? So here we go. I do it on all of them at once, right? So this is the iterative process that I mentioned earlier. Now I'm going to do it again on each of those little tiny sides. I'm going to take out the middle third and bump it out. There we go. And this is about as far as I can draw it so that we can still see anything going on. You can tell it's already starting to look kind of fuzzy. We just keep doing this on into infinity, and we call the end result the Koch snowflake. So it's the boundary of this figure. And as I said, some weird things go on here. Like it's enclosing finite area because it can all be trapped in a circle. But remember, we talked about how each line was replaced. So like when I started with 1, what replaced it was now 4/3. So the thing that originally had perimeter 1 or 3, that triangle, now would have 4/3 plus 4/3 plus 4/3. That's 12/3. So now that has perimeter 4. So the curve is longer. And that happens every time I multiply by 4/3. So it gets longer and longer and longer. And as n goes to infinity, as I iterate this again and again and again, I get an infinite curve. So I have infinite length enclosing a finite boundary, which feels a little weird. Well, what about the dimension of this thing? So normally a curve I would kind of think of as 1-dimensional. Even if it's bending, it's not a straight line. You can kind of tell me 1 point and it would be able to tell me where you are on that line. The Koch snowflake is different. This has what we call fractal dimension. and it's about 1.2619. So now I know what you're wondering. How did you get that number? And please don't tell me if I don't like math, because it might freak me out too much. So I'm going to try not to do that, but I am going to try to tell you where this comes from. First of all, the pieces, I'm not going to go into the computational details, so don't worry about that. The pieces of it are, this is what makes it difficult. First of all, fractions, which if you don't like math and that started in elementary school, fractions is probably what did it to you. So I'm sorry about that. Also logarithms, if you made it through fractions and you stopped liking math in high school, this might be what did you in. So again, sorry about that. And limits, which if you didn't get as far as calculus, you probably never had to do, but they also involve fractions and sometimes logarithms. So, so we're stuck with that. I'm not going to go into the details of that, but I actually do want to talk to you a little bit about logarithms because they're not as bad as you think. Really, a logarithm is just an exponent. So I think of seeing an expression like log 10 of 100 as asking me a question. What number would I have to put on 10 as an exponent to get 100? The logarithm is just an exponent. And then I think it's not so hard to see, right? If I square 10, I get 100. 10 times 10 is 100. So 2 is the exponent that I would need. So the log base 10 of 100 is 2. What about the log base 2 of 8? Well, what number do I need to put on 8 as an exponent, on 2 as an exponent to get 8? Well, 2 squared is 4, 2 cubed is 8. So 3 is the number I'd have to put on 2 to get 8. So log base 2 of 8 is 3. I won't torture you with more of those, but I just want to again kind of reiterate that a logarithm is an exponent. It's what you put on the base to get the other number. Now, what is log base 10 of 49? It'll torture you just a little bit more. Well, 10 to the 1 is 10. 10 squared is 100. 49 is somewhere in between there. So the log base 10 of 49 is going to be a number between 1 and 2. So I don't take 10 to the first power. I don't square it. I do something in between. And that's what we're getting at with fractal dimension. But often we get at it what? By just counting boxes so that we can kind of see are the number of boxes we need to cover this thing one-dimensional, two-dimensional, three-dimensional, or what? What's the exponent? So I'm going to quickly go through this, but I think I can make it understandable. Now, I actually thought I changed this and it did not turn out change. Well, I'll go with this language. So I'm going to call a 1/4 box a segment of length 1/4. Okay, so this is a segment of length 1, and I'm going to think of making a number line with segments of length 1/4. So these are one-dimensional boxes. Okay. And if the number line, if the segment is sitting exactly in there, it intersects 4 of those boxes. And maybe I shift it a little bit. Now it intersects 5 of them, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But it's not going to intersect more than 5 of them, no matter how much I move it around. So we say that the maximum number of these one-dimensional 1/n boxes is about n. And we're going to keep making n, which is 4 for my example, get bigger and bigger and bigger. So like once it's 1/1,000,000, each of those little things is 1/1,000,000 length. Yeah, whether you're covering 1,000,000 of those or 1,000,000 plus 1, probably doesn't make a really big difference. What if we take that same thing we think of as one-dimensional, we try to put it in a two-dimensional grid? Well, we could put it there so it hits exactly 4 of those boxes. So my side 1/4 squares, I need 4 of them to contain this thing. I could shift it a little, so now it needs 5. I could angle it a little. See if I count there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 boxes it needed. So that went up a little bit. But if you think about it, no matter how I put this thing in here, absolute worst case scenario is that it would go down n and over n. Of course, it won't make it that many, right? Because it's still only length 1. So I can't go length 1 down and length 1 over. There won't be enough for the diagonal segment that I put in there. But that's kind of worst case scenario, right? So as n shoots off really high, like once I have 1/1,000,000 by 1/1,000,000 side boxes that I'm covering this with, at most I've got 2n of them. So this is still n to the first power, right? It's that exponent that we're going for. Suppose we put that same segment in a 3D grid. Okay, so I only built one layer of this. So like here, the dark square would be the front of the cube, And the light square back here would be the back of the cube. And then here, this side, the edges. Can you kind of picture those? So this is like one layer of cubic subdivided space. Well, again, I'm not going to try to put it there because I don't think we can really see it. But if you put this thing in here, it could go down as far as 4 cubes. These are 1/4 in their sides. It could go over 4. It could go back 4. It's certainly not going to do all of those because it runs out of length. But basically, worst case scenario, you get n plus n plus n of those boxes that you're hitting. So that's 3n. Again, notice the exponent is 1. And when n is super, super huge, the 3 isn't going to make that much difference either. All right, what if we try with something we think of as 2-dimensional? So a square and its interior. And I'm going to try to use these same 1/4 boxes, right? These 1-dimensional boxes, segments of length 1/4. Well, there's no way I can put enough of them in there to cover the square. It's just not going to happen. So that's because the square is 2-dimensional, not 1-dimensional, right? It won't fit in a 1-dimensional grid. But if we get a 2-dimensional grid, now it fits. And it could cover exactly 16 of those little squares, or could cover a little bit more if we move it, shift it around like this one is. Worst case scenario, you're covering like 2 times n squared of the things. So it's kind of way high bad, but notice a square coming in there. If I put it in the cubic grid, now could go down 4, could go over 4, could go back 4. Worst case, you're covering 3n squared. You're not going to pick up a cubic number of these things. So again, that exponent is the important thing. All right, done with that, but let's think about this applied to something like the Koch snowflake. So here's the idea. I start with a big grid and I count how many boxes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. How many boxes? I've lost track. I think 14 have some of the snowflake in it, right? So this one counts actually because it's got a little, but this doesn't count, that doesn't count, and so on. So I count those up. And then I do it with a smaller grid. So I'm letting my n, the denominator of the side lengths of these boxes, shrink down. Well, n goes up and then the side goes down. And I have one of these over here, of course, too, and down there. And I count again the boxes that I hit. And then I put in a finer grid. And now I count the boxes that are hit. So we do this finer and finer and finer until we start to converge on an exponent in the number of boxes that we get. And that's where we came up with 1.2619 for the fractal dimension of the Koch snowflake. So let me put this into context of other things that you're more familiar with. If we were doing this idea with the state of Wyoming, this is one of the simplest state boundaries there is, right? 3 sides of it are just totally straight lines. And the 4th one has a little bit of river action going on. Like I think this is the Yellowstone River. And so maybe something a little odd goes on there, but for the most part, that's not going to affect things very much. And so basically, Wyoming has a 1-dimensional boundary. Well, what if we look at South Africa? What's the dimension of South Africa's boundary? It's got some smooth parts, but it's got a lot more kind of craggy parts. So there's more interesting stuff going on here. So someone blew up the map and put on these grids on it and got the grid smaller and smaller and smaller and figured out that it's about 1.02 dimensional. So pretty close to 1-dimensional, but not exactly. What about Britain? Wow, that's a craggy map. There's all kinds of inlets and just stuff all over, promontories, different things that are going to affect the dimension. So again, this was computed as about 1.25 dimensional. So it's not 2-dimensional, the edge, but it's more than 1-dimensional somehow. Okay, what about the surface of a head of broccoli? Now surface, this is counting each of these little, leaf things as part of the surface. So I'm not talking about the whole clump, but just the boundary part of it, not the insides. And yeah, that's 2.66 dimensional. So that's getting pretty close to 3-dimensional. What about the human brain? So again, just the surface, not the whole thing, but the surface, the outer coating, but the outer coating covers all those little nooks and crannies, right? That are kind of crammed in against each other. So it turns out this is 2.79 dimensional. Now this is kind of fascinating. So it made me think about neurodegenerative diseases. What do they do to the fractal dimension of your brain? Our brains are pretty efficient. In fact, it's said that we don't use anywhere near all of them. Well, I looked this up. I have not read this article, but just the abstract of the article is really fascinating. And they noted, among other things, that and I can't remember now which one is which. One hemisphere of our brain increases, its fractal dimension increases until adolescence, and then it starts to decrease. The other side increases until adulthood, and then it starts to decrease. The fractal dimension of gray matter in the brain decreases in Alzheimer's patients, but increases in MS patients. The fractal dimension of the white matter in the brain decreases in both ALS and MS patients. So this could at some point be a diagnostic tool for helping doctors understand what they're dealing with in patients. Again, smaller fractal dimension, less efficiency. How about the surface of the human lung? So here's an image. Doesn't, the artist can't draw all the little air sacs and things with as much care as they could, but anyway, because of the limitations of the picture. But think about all those little air sacs in there, and how they are pulling oxygen out of the air and putting it into the blood. Well, that surface, it turns out to be, wow, almost three-dimensional, and that's why they're so efficient at their work. But again, you get a lung disease, and it's going to decrease that fractal dimension. Okay, what about higher dimensions? Well, as I've said, we can add on extra coordinates. That works. Physicists, some physicists anyway, speculate that there might actually be up to 11 dimensions of the world that we live in. Some are wound so tightly up that we can't perceive them. This is actually part of string theory. In fact, the 11th dimension is proposed by superstring theorists. This is not an area of mathematics that I really know anything about, but I'm going to take them at their word for that. We have long talked, not only in science, but in popular culture, about the space-time continuum. Might our sense of time really be our perception of a fourth dimension? In fact, time as a fourth dimension is one of the 11 that physicists talk about. Might God be somehow outside time, so that God's experience of time is not the same of ours? Well, this is not inconsistent with the Bible. Isaiah says that God is eternal. Psalm 90 says that God is from everlasting to everlasting. Even C.S. Lewis got into this and suggested that God is, sorry, I gotta see my screen here, all times are eternally present to God. That there's, perhaps it's true that God forever, here's how Lewis put it, sees you in the nursery pulling the wings off a fly. I've not been able to forget that since I read it. He goes on and suggests other things too. Now, I think in my childhood, I never pulled the wings off a fly, but I certainly did other horrible things that I don't like to think about God seeing all the time. I kind of like to think he's focused in on the positive aspects of my life. But this makes me think about forgiveness in a different way, and the importance of forgiveness, and the fact that God's ability to forgive is so different from my own. All right. Well, as I said before, it's hard to think about higher dimensions trapped in our three-dimensional world. It's hard to get a geometric view of what this might look like. Coordinates, I'm good with. I can keep adding coordinates, but how to think physically about what could be going on. What we're going to do next is approach this by way of an analogy. So how might creatures in a lower dimensional world perceive us, someone in a higher dimensional world who's interacting with them? And this is where Flatland comes into play. So there you go. I tell my students I like to start every class with an exciting moment. That was your exciting moment. Notice I made sure it was Flatland. It's the sarcasm coming in. Here's a view of Flatland. So the creatures in Flatland are geometric figures in their interiors. And this is our view, of course, looking down at them. This is not what the Flatlander sees. This is what the Flatlander sees, something like this. So you might imagine looking along a tabletop, or here's my piece of cardboard, right? This is what you see, just what, like what's on the surface of that. You can't see anything above or below it. So this is how Flatlanders see each other, okay? Now, when I'm, well, let's talk about this. What would you say is a Flatlander's skin? What's the boundary of a Flatlander's body? for the square, like it's not this, right? This is the square's insides. This is where his heart and lungs are, if he has such things, however it works for squares in Flatland. But the square would say that his skin is the actual square, not the interior part, just the boundary there. That if a surgeon in Flatland had to do surgery on the square, the surgeon would cut through the skin in some way in order to get access to the interior. By the way, I've been speaking here of the men in Flatland. This is the way Abbott wrote the book. The women are literally one-dimensional characters, or as I like to think of them, assassins. Anyway, okay. Our square, the main character of the book, is actually named A Square. One day he has a dream, and in his dream he encounters a one-dimensional world called Lineland. And so he notices the inhabitants of Lineland, and they're line segments. Well, I mean, the men are, the women are points because they have to be less than men apparently. Written in 1903, actually Abbott was satirizing Victorian culture at the time as well. So he did this on purpose to make a point. Anyway, the square decides I'm going to talk to a man in Flatland, or in Lineland. So he moves over and he starts speaking to the man in Lineland. Now, what does the Lineland guy hear? What does he feel? How does he experience this? He presumably has ears somewhere, but what are the boundaries of the line segment? It's not this stuff. This is like, his heart, his lungs, his guts, that kind of stuff. It's the endpoints. Those are his boundaries. To a Linelander, to get inside his body, you'd have to go through one of the endpoints. So the square's talking to him, and he feels this echoing inside his body, right? It's freaking him out. He says, how can this be? Is this a God? Is there a God speaking to me? Am I going crazy? And the square is kind of frustrated with that. So the square decides, I'm going to go over and just stick my mouth into Lineland so that he sees me and he believes I'm real. We can have this conversation. So they start having this conversation, and the Flatlander is trying to convince the line segment that there's a whole extra dimension to the world that he is missing. And he says, you just need to step up. And the Linelander says, up? You mean north? Flatlander says, no, just step up off the line. There's just all this other world out here. And the line segment never does buy it. So the square kind of gets disgusted. He gives up and walks away. Well, technically he ends the dream. He wakes up. Okay, here's a square back in Flatland, relaxing in his house. They didn't really know how to draw a relaxed square, maybe a rhombus. You can picture that. So anyway, the square is here, back in Flatland. And one day the square hears a voice, and it turns out that it's a sphere up in Spaceland. And the scene plays out a lot like it did for the square in the line segment, with the sphere talking to the square. And the square thinking, am I going crazy? Is this a God? What's going on here? And so just like the square did, the sphere enters Flatland. So what does a Flatlander see? Well, at first just a point, right? The sphere is tangent to Flatland, and there's just one point. And then as the sphere kind of pushes his way in more, the square sees the arc where the sphere is intersecting Flatland. So we know from our vantage point in the third dimension that there's half the sphere here and half the sphere down here. The square only sees the front part of the arc between him and the rest of the sphere. So he sees there's something there. He has no idea what it really looks like. And the sphere, though, is not like the square. So he doesn't just give up. He actually goes over and grabs onto the square and yanks him up into Spaceland. So now the square is up there in Spaceland with the sphere, and he looks down and he sees Flatland the way we do. So he can see inside of the bodies of people in Flatland in a way that he never imagined possible. Now, I realize this view isn't new to the rest of you, but the square was really impressed. He thinks, wow, my world is just a two-dimensional slice of something much, much bigger. He becomes a true believer. And so eventually he asks the sphere what the fourth dimension is like. And the sphere laughs at him and says, no, you fool. There are only three dimensions to the world, which is interesting. So the square, having experienced a new dimension, can begin to imagine more. But the sphere, trapped in his own limited understanding of the world, can't. He assumes that his dimensional knowledge is complete, and he's unwilling to take the analogy farther. Okay, we're going to do a little diversion here. Just again, I want you to get the idea for what it is for us to try to picture something from a higher dimension coming down to be with us. What figure would you say is passing through Flatland here? You can watch as it goes through. So is that, let's see, I feel like it got stopped here somewhere. There we go. Was that a sphere, a rectangle, a rectangular box, a discarded toilet paper tube? The rectangular box and the toilet paper tube are neck and neck. They're racing here. Looks like the box is starting to win. Oh, the rectangle has made a roll, made an appearance. The sphere is on there a little bit. Rectangular box is winning the race. We'll really keep going a little bit here. Okay, things seem to have settled down, so I will end this poll and share the results. All right, so about 8% of you said it was a sphere. I would say no, because you think about a sphere, okay, here's my Flatland, right? So a sphere is like a ball. So if it's going through, I'll do that off to the side. It's gonna touch down at like a point, and then you'll start seeing circles passing through Flatland. So we didn't see circles, so it's not a sphere. Is it a rectangle? Well, what if a rectangle, I don't have a rectangle handy. Here we go, my phone. My phone is passing through Flatland. I would probably not see a rectangle, right? Rectangles don't actually have the depth that the phone does. So I would just see a straight line segment going all the way through. A rectangular box, that turns out to be it. So here's my lovely rectangular box with black edges. So I'm going to show you this. Let's see, we'll get out of this and I'll show you my box. There it is. This is what it is, but it's okay, there are my black edges. You can just pretend that the rest is red. The back of it is black as well. And so here's Flatland, here's my box. I'm gonna do it this way, I think. So it's coming down at an angle. So it's hitting first like this, and that's when we saw just that line segment. As it sinks down in, it's cutting off, the Flatland is cutting off a rectangle. The rectangle gets bigger and bigger until it hits sort of this max diagonal. And then the front edge becomes red because it's up here, and the back edge is picking up the rest of it going through. So I'll just show that to you one more time. Oops, go back one. Here we go. Here's that thing passing through. See if you can believe that. Okay, so that was the rectangular box passing through Flatland. Well, that's our view of it. Up here in the third dimension, we can see the whole way that it intersects Flatland. What does a Flatlander see passing through Flatland? Well, let's try it head on. Okay, so from the Flatlander's view, okay, head on from the Flatlander's view, here we are. Watch it pass through. Wow, do you have any idea what that thing looks like? Would you have any idea if we hadn't just gone through that? Well, maybe it's a little better. Maybe the square is looking at it from an angle, right? So we'll watch that. Here we go. There it's passing through. About halfway through, now it's going on the rest, now it's gone. It just passed through. Did that give you any insight into what this figure is actually like? I don't think so. But can we argue that that wasn't the actual figure passing through? No, what we saw was absolutely what we could see of that figure in Flatland. Could that not be the same for us? C.S. Lewis, in fact, notes that the Christians well, you notice that if you were to tell a Flatlander about a cube, you might describe it as 6 squares put together. What's the Flatlander going to see? Well, the Flatlander is either going to see 6 squares side by side, or imagine these, right? You can't see the whole thing at once, and lose the unity of it, or the Flatlander is going to see 6 squares stacked on top, sort of superimposed on each other, and lose the distinctness of each side, each face of the cube. Lewis notes that the Christian's trouble perceiving the Trinity is much the same. How can we, in our finite existence understand 3 things that are yet one thing? All right, So what's the connection? Well, what happens in Flatland? We've talked about inhabitants and their boundaries, and that those are different when viewed from within Flatland. So like the square thinks that this is his boundary, and viewed from above Flatland, where that doesn't seem to be a boundary at all. You can just go right through that thing. What about when a creature from another dimension interacts with the Flatlander? How does the Flatlander experience a voice coming from another dimension? How does a Flatlander experience touch from a being from another dimension? How does a Flatlander experience the presence of someone from another dimension? What if I were to reach my hand into Flatland and I start off by just touching my fingertips to it? The Flatlander would see 5 little points and think that they had no connection to each other. And if I push my way in a little further, then he'd see little finger arcs, right, intersecting Flatland. And he would think these were 5 completely different things moving around in Flatland. He would not be able to perceive the connection at all. So what about us on Earth? What are the boundaries of our bodies? Well, I kind of think it's my skin, right? I've never been a big fan of the faith healing idea, but when I read Flatland, I started to think about it a little bit differently. I mean, I do pray for people who are sick. I pray for people who are injured. I pray for God's healing touch, but I have no idea what that really means, right? But Flatland helps me think about it differently. Can God actually reach through what I think of as this impassable boundary of my skin and hold a bone together while it heals? I think maybe he can. At least my understanding of dimension gives me a way that I could accept such a thing happening. What we serve this unlimited God. Wouldn't 3 dimensions seem pretty confining to God? Isn't it more likely that we live in a 3-dimensional slice of God's dimensions, much like Flatland is a 2-dimensional slice of Spaceland? What's it like to hear God's voice, to feel God's touch, to sense God's presence? I lost my notes. In Genesis 32, we see God wrestling with Jacob. In Exodus 13, God's presence is with Israel as a pillar of cloud by day and as a pillar of fire by night. To Christians, the Gospels describe how God walked among us in the person of Jesus Christ. If we were all in a room together, like, a real room instead of a Zoom room, and I looked out at you, I would feel like I was seeing a whole bunch of totally different people, unconnected to each other. But you know what? Maybe there is a connection in a dimension that I just can't perceive of. Ephesians 4 verses 4 through 6 say there is one body and one spirit, just as you are called to one hope when you were called, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and in all and through all. Maybe those aren't just words. Okay, before we go on, I'm going to give you a brief preview again. We talked about this briefly earlier when Ben was introducing the series and the next episodes in it. So Dr. Victor Katz will meet with us in June and talk about how religion in medieval times shaped the Jewish, Muslim, and Catholic study of mathematics. This is fascinating stuff. I think you'll all enjoy that. And additional information is available on the Mount Sinai website or via this link. For further reading, I recommend, of course, Mathematics Through the Eyes of Faith and Flatland. Flatland is available free online, though it's hard for me to read on a computer. I don't know about you, but you can buy a copy for like $2. There's also a book called Spaceland. It's supposed to be the 3-dimensional analog. I've seen mixed reviews on that. I haven't read it yet myself, but I think the ideas would be fascinating. There's a Flatland movie or 2 out there you could look at. David Newhouser wrote an article called Higher Dimensions in the Writings of C.S. Lewis. This is available online as a PDF. This gets into Flatland as well, and also obviously the writings of Lewis. And the ACMS has a journal, a peer-reviewed journal that's available at acmsonline.org. There's also stuff available there that's from conferences. Now the conference proceedings are peer-reviewed. I don't know if they always were. And in particular, there's an article by Tom Banchoff on the 4th dimension, which gets much more into who uh, Edwin Abbott was and why he wrote about Flatland in the way he did. Again, I'm happy to talk to anyone by email at any point. That would be fun for me. And now we open it up for questions.
So thank you so much, Dr. Jongerius, for giving us not only rich examples to expand the dimensionality of our thinking about religion, but also using language and structure of mathematics to give us a framework for it as well. And I just personally love that ending, that maybe these aren't just words, how the dimensions of geometry yield such a rich metaphor for spirituality. And I want to give a quick shout out to Dr. Francis Su, who we're happy to have with us here tonight, for recommending you for this series, because it was a winner. Rabbi Zeidman and I really appreciate your broadening our knowledge and our series with your insights from your Christian faith practice. And I guess we'll hit the rest of the Abrahamic faith trio with our June speaker, because Dr. Victor Katz will be talking about how religion in the Middle Ages shaped Jewish, Catholic, and Muslim mathematics. Also at this time, Rabbi Zeidman will again paste into the chat window the link for the 2-minute anonymous Google Forms survey we'd like each attendee to complete to give us feedback about this session of our speaker series, because having that data will be more helpful to us and our funders rather than just making assumptions about how it went, right? So we will now move into the evening's Q&A portion. I've been collecting questions from the audience, and you're welcome to, as your mind continues to spin from everything, as you continue thinking of questions, it's not too late to type them into the chat window, and we will go from there. So we'll start off with a question from Rabbi Zeidman. Let's see, I think he just put it right back in the chat window here. Yes, Judaism often warns against thinking of God as corporeal and anthropomorphizing God. Do you think this is with regard to defining God by third-dimensional terms? If we are incapable of understanding that which is beyond our dimension, how should we think and talk about things beyond our dimension?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we should talk about them carefully and with great humility. So we all come to faith from different perspectives, from different backgrounds. I have reasons for the things I believe. I absolutely think they're the truth, but I also know that I am not God. And therefore, it is absolutely true that some of the things I believe are wrong. I don't know which things those are. If I knew, I wouldn't believe them, right? But because I'm not God, there are things I believe that just aren't true. And so I need to be have humility, not only with my understanding of my own perceptions, but the way I speak to other people about faith, that I don't go in with the presumption that I have all the answers. And that includes the way I picture God. So I think we can picture God in different ways. I think the Bible makes it clear that there are different ways that that God appears even to different people, or different ways that God appears in different times, and different ways that God speaks to people. And so, yeah, in terms of anthropomorphizing, if you say, well, this is what God is like, this is the way we always see God, I think that's a mistake personally, because I just don't think we can be certain of that. And I think we're better together if we can accept that other people have reasons for what they believe too, and for the ways that they picture God.
Thank you. And I think that ties right into another question that Rabbi Zeidman also had submitted. He says, Judaism teaches that there is no one single way to think about God. There are a variety of accepted theologies. Some believe God is actively present. Others believe God is remote. Still others believe God is nature or a process. How does this discussion of axioms reflect itself in religion versus mathematics?
Yeah. So absolutely. What are your foundational beliefs? What do you assume, and how does that tie into everything else, right? This is not just true in religion, it's true in so much in life. It's one of the reasons we have trouble with politics, is that we come from different perspectives. We have different assumptions. We get into the most trouble when we start making assumptions about other people, right? And so I think, again, we really have to have humility. in all that we do. Now, in mathematics, I can have a lot of certainty because we do make the assumptions clear and we follow the rules of logic. And I know that, well, it's possible I made a mistake in the proof, right? But with the peer review process, those would usually come to light. Once something has been proved, darn it, that's true. Given those assumptions, though, and the same thing is true with faith questions. I think we need to know what the assumptions are. If I say I believe the Bible is the Word of God, well, there are a lot of different ways people interpret that too. I met a man once who said he was reading the Bible. When he found I started Christian college, he said, "Oh, I set it a goal to read the entire Bible in 1 year." And I was like, "Oh, that's really cool. This guy's probably a Christian." And then he said, "Yeah, I was looking for all the contradictions I could find." I thought this guy might not be a Christian. And he said that he named a few, like the place in First Kings describing the molten sea that that was 15 cubics across and 45 around. Well, that's only true if pi is equal to 3, which it's not. On the other hand, we didn't have a decimal system back in those days, and God was not writing a science book. So to me, that's not inconsistent. But to someone who insists that the Bible is literally word for word, everything true, that's harder for me. It would be hard for me because of examples like that, where I go, well, that's just not true. Now, was God approximating? I think that's a safe bet, right? So maybe in that sense, I could say it's still literally true. We're just using an approximation for pi. But we need to know what those assumptions are.
Now, I know that you also occasionally teach statistics at your college, correct? Do you find that because statistics isn't as much of a deductive from axioms kind of thing, that there's statistics means never having to say you're certain, right? There's always this margin of error. So right. Does this apply to something like statistics, or does that take you in a very different direction?
I think it does. I think even in hypothesis testing, right? What's the null hypothesis, the thing that you assume going into it, which you can never prove because you are using that assumption to test the data. And so this is something I really have to drill into students, right? You will never have enough evidence to prove something that you have assumed to begin with. In fact, what we're looking for in this case is evidence against that assumption, because we could provide that. We could find enough evidence to reject that assumption, but I can't assume that God exists and use that assumption to prove to you that God exists, right? That does not work. And so in that sense, there are some easy connections to make in stats class because of the way that we use assumptions in stats class. And yet it really is more like I would assume God exists and then try to find a contradiction in that assumption, right? Which is what this guy was doing reading through the Bible. Okay, fine, I'll have it your way. Suppose this is the word of God. Oh, look, that's wrong. Oh, look, that's wrong. So that's the way he would have come at it.
We had someone ask the question when you kept zooming in on the coastline or whatever. When you keep zooming in, isn't there some limiting spatial resolution? Are we going down to the atomic scale? How would you answer that?
Yeah, of course, there's natural limitations of what we can do, but really what we look for in the limit is this kind of thing. We say that a process has a limit if we can get there's something there that we can identify that we can get as close to as we could possibly want to get to it. So for example, that sequence of 0.9, 0.99, 0.99. Another way to think about that is, okay, I'm going to tell you it converges, it ends at 1. And you're going to ask me why. And I'm going to say, well, tell me how close you want to get to 1. And I can get you that close. I can get you closer than that, right? And you go, well, no, then I didn't pick a small enough thing. I'm going to pick this other thing. Well, I can get you closer than that. And so what happens is basically eventually the decimals start to kind of converge onto something. So that's why when I was giving those fractal dimensions, I was saying approximately, it's approximately this. Eventually we got to grids fine enough that we weren't doing substantially better. The better was like more than 3 decimal places out. So we go, all right, it might change a little bit there, but it's not going to affect these anymore. And so we're ready to claim that this is the best approximation of the correct answer.
One thing that's fascinating to me as I scan more of the chat window is that the very same analogy you gave us with the dimensions and the flatland is is yielding almost opposite reactions from people. It's fascinating. One person is saying, couldn't these shadow encounters of other dimensions be just as easily caused by some other highly developed life form or robot or naturally occurring event? Why do we have to attribute them to God? Whereas someone else takes the same situation and says, is saying, well, what if God is even farther beyond higher dimension? What if our usage of dimension is a creation of God and God is beyond even that? So it's like you've given people material to go in either direction, it looks like, which is great. I think it's a sign of so I'm not sure there's a question necessarily for you there. I'd like to ask a bigger picture question. You mentioned, like, with your tenure paper that, that you've integrated your faith and your subject matter, and you've taught varied classes at your Christian liberal arts college. I'm just curious, which aspects or topics of integrating math and faith do your students seem most surprised or inspired by?
They love Flatland. I've had classes ask me again and again, well, like groups of students, math majors going through, who ask me again and again to talk about Flatland. I had a guy who had been in just one of my lower level classes. As I recall, wasn't one of the best students, but paid attention in class. And one day he sent me an email. He said, hey, I don't know if you remember me. I'm so-and-so. I was in your college algebra class 10 years ago. And I did. I remembered him, which isn't always the case. But he said, I remember you talking about Flatland. Do you have something you could send me on that? Because I'd like to use it in my middle school Sunday school class. It's like, yes, I have stuff I can send you. This is so awesome. And a few years ago, I got the opportunity to speak at graduation. And there were like a number of speeches I had to do that year. And I thought, well, Flatland is a great thing to do. And I was talking to a colleague, and I said, yeah, I'm going to do this thing on Flatland. It's this great integrative thing. And I said, I figure I can use it for these luncheons and also for graduation, because those will have different audiences. And she looked at me with such pity in her eyes. And she said, oh, Kim, nobody's going to remember what you talked about. So one of these talks during that year, an alumnus from the college was in the audience. Actually, it was the alumni board. And one person raised her hand and said, hey, I remember you talked about Flatland in this class I took from you years ago. Could you talk about that again? I'm like, yeah. Could you go find Patty Thayer and just tell her that you remember that talk? because it does, it opens your mind to think of the possibilities. So could the things we attribute to God, people of faith attribute to God, be some other being interacting with our world that's in the higher dimension? I think they could, but it helps me understand the ways in which God has already told us that he has interacted with our world. It helps me see how that might be possible. It helps me see how it might be possible for God to do some of the many things that God says he has and will do for us. That's why it's valuable to me.
I think this ties into another question that just came in. Are you saying that God abides by physics and mathematics, or is this more of an effort to prove that there is a lot we cannot know and are unable to prove?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's addressed a little bit in the book. It gets more into the philosophy of things, which is not a direction I go most often. But right, so there's some Christians, even among Christians, there's not agreement on plenty of things. And one of them is for Christian mathematicians, did God create mathematics, and is God then choosing to follow those laws, right? Are we rethinking the thoughts of God when we do mathematics? A lot of us believe that, but that may be partly because it's kind of an, hey, cool, I'm thinking like God thing, right? And is God, so one of the questions in that big questions opening chapter, could God make 2 and 2 and plus and equals and 5 all still have the same meanings they do now, but also make 2 + 2 = 5 be a true equation? Can God do that? Well, many of us respond that no, it's not that. I mean, can God do what he wants? Is God all powerful? Yeah, but God's also consistent. That's part of God's nature. And so to expect that God would suddenly do something inconsistent with his nature, change the rules on us, so to speak, it seems incompatible with who God says he is. Then you get into touchy things with miracles, right? So then, okay, so did Jesus turn the water into wine? Did God help Moses part the Red Sea? Did all that stuff really happen? Yeah, those are tough philosophical questions, absolutely.
So in introducing you, we mentioned your involvement in the Association of Christians in the Mathematical Sciences, and many of our attendees today may not have heard of that organization. Would you like to share a little bit about what it does and how it aligns with the mission of this speaker series to show that faith and science can work together?
Yeah, so it started in, I believe, the late 1970s. So I was, that was actually long before even well, not before I was born, before I was interested in mathematics or out of junior high, but started then, and by a small group, well, primarily one man, Bob Brabenec, out of Messiah College in Illinois, and he had some like-minded friends who I think wanted a place as much as anything to be able to complete themselves as humans, as Christians, as mathematicians, to have a place where they could share integrative ideas, integrative thinking, maybe even push the frontiers of integrative thinking. And then it kind of expanded over time. So it's still, that's still a goal of the organization, but it's also a place where at our conferences, like I could give just a straight math talk. The next one we have was supposed to be this summer. We've postponed it to 2022. I'll probably give a talk on that honors class that I developed, or I might give one on the senior seminar that I teach, and the way that I've used Francis Su's new book, Mathematics for Human Flourishing, which also you should absolutely read. It's a phenomenal book. Anyway, I've used that really well. It's gotten my students to think really deeply about a lot of questions, even though it's not an explicitly Christian book at all, but it is a value-laden book. So those are not specifically mathematics, they're not specifically integration, but they're still, we want to be our whole selves in this organization. So where can I be authentically Christian, authentically mathematically minded, authentically human, and have all these things intersect?
Thank you. And I don't know if this is the first time you've given a talk for a series hosted by a Jewish congregation, but again, we really thank you for doing this. I don't know if you have any quick reflection on because I gave the first talk on a topic that is in your book. And so did you have any reflections on how similar or how different our approaches were based on
Yeah, that's interesting. So I loved your talk, and often, I don't think this is unique to me. Often when I'm listening to someone talk, I'm listening to what they're saying, but I'm also kind of thinking how I would have done it differently. I think those of us who speak professionally for a living, kind of do that. Like writers read stuff, and it's hard for them to just read the writing without thinking about how they would have said it differently. But I never found myself thinking that. I never found myself going, oh, Larry, you should have done this here. I mean, there were times when I went, oh, it would be neat to see this connection, but it never, like, there seriously, and that's really rare for me, that I didn't go, yeah, I would have said that really differently. I thought you did a nice job. Of course, some of the integration you did, I didn't understand because you were connecting more explicitly to the Jewish faith. And but then I learned some things, right? And it helped me to think about things a little bit differently as well. And frankly, I've always thought of it's the monotheistic part of our shared faith that really connects more strongly to mathematics than anything specifically Christian. Now, the book takes a different point of view on that, although there's certainly nothing in the book aside from explicit reference to Jesus Christ that would go against Judaism either. I think that shared common theistic, monotheistic theology is all over the place.
Well, we thank you again so much. Our Ben will put the link to the Google Form survey once more in the chat window if anyone hasn't yet already done that. We've hit the 90-minute mark. This was just wonderful. Rabbi Zeidman, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Just to express my gratitude to you, Dr. Jongerius, and also to you, Dr. Lesser, for handling the Q&A and moderating that. And I have to admit that I did not understand every single piece of this conversation. But what I did understand most especially was how much we cannot know and how much we do not know, and how open we have to be to possibility in the world for things that we can't explain, or that I can't explain, and that you can explain certainly better than I can, and somebody else might be able to explain differently. And I think that that's just eye-opening and mind expanding for me. So I'm extremely grateful to you for helping to share that and to share this as part of our message here in our effort to combine and connect religion and mathematics over the course of this series. It's been incredible so far, and I feel badly for those who have to come after, because they have a high bar to meet between the two of you. I'm so grateful to both of you. And I'm grateful to all of you for spending your evening with us. Thank you so very, very much.
Oh, there was one quip I should include. Someone posted, the fourth dimension is time and the fifth dimension is a band from the 1970s.
Let me also say it's been wonderful getting to know you, Kim, over the course of preparing for this. And I consider you a friend, and I'm grateful for this opportunity, and hope it brings many more opportunities for us to connect and get together. Thank you so very much for your time.
You're welcome. Thanks for asking.
A video of this talk will be posted on the sign up page. So if there's something if you arrived late or didn't catch and would like to see a part of it again, you can do that.
And it'll be on YouTube as well to share with your friends. That's where it's going to link to. So thank you very, very much. And thank you all for learning with us this evening.
Maybe we should all unmute and give her applause.
Oh, you know what? I turned off the ability for everyone to unmute. So, but you can look at everybody's picture and see it.
There you go.
There were definitely applause.
I
Thank
consider
you so
myself-
much, everyone, and be well. And I hope this leads you into a wonderful week of learning and reflection on this topic and many others. Thank
And we'll
you.
see you in June with Dr. Victor Katz.
June 10th. Thank you, everyone.